What we're really going to be focusing on in this project is exposing the API, and then formatting the information that we expose through the API. So this is going to use something called serializers that we'll talk about, and that's how to format our JSON responses from our API. We also want to be able to test APIs, and so we'll be practicing that. And then we are going to get back into some advanced active record queries. I know y'all did some of that in mod 2, so we're going to continue down that road of building advanced queries. And then also along the lines of active record, we're going to be writing some basic SQL statements as well. Any questions about that, about the explicit learning goals before I move on? Or kind of the premise of this project? Okay. So the other things that we want you to really focus on as you are working on this project are some of these other skills that revolve around reading documentation, time management. Can be in the past, I don't know how much it's changed since the last time I taught mod 3, but this is a pretty hefty project. And so it's going to be really important for you to manage your time well in order to get through your MVP. And also it's going to be important to prioritize your work and really get some practice around how to break down your project so into small pieces and into small steps. And then also, I think the skill of research. So really being able to, find information that's going to help you solve the problems and reach out and use all of your resources. One thing that we want to encourage you to do as you're working through this project is to really practice an agile workflow. So as much as possible, you want to take a look at the requirements. We encourage you to utilize your project board and really plan out your work first. Plan out your work and try to estimate how much time you think it's going to take, and then actually do the work afterwards. So instead of just working right away, try to do some upfront planning and try to set some milestones of what you want to have done by when. And also make sure that that is flexible so that you can get that, at least the MVP done in the amount of time that you have. There's a couple of ways that we, I'm gonna come back to that later. So one of the things that'll be a little bit different in this project is that we are going to have almost like a test runner. It's going to be built into Postman, and that will actually run and try to hit you the API endpoints that you built, and then it'll tell you whether or not the correct data is coming back. And so that's going to be the test runner that's going to determine whether or not you have your API built correctly. It'll all be in Postman. I'll have Ian walk through that a little bit later after we've kind of explained some more about the project. And so look forward to that. It's going to be, really interesting. So I'm going to skip this section for now. And then I'm going to talk about the technical requirements. And if you've got questions, feel free to just raise your hand and ask along the way as well. So one thing I definitely encourage you to do is on your own, you need to read through this very carefully. I think there's a lot of details in here, and so it's easy to miss things if you just kind of skim it and start working. So make sure you pay attention to the details. For the setup, it's important that you do name your project Rails Engine. There is some configuration that's dependent on your project being named Rails Engine. And we are going to make an API only Rails application. So that's something that you do want to set up. For the data, we're actually giving you like a Postgres like data dump for you to load into your database. So you won't have to import any CSVs. You won't need to create a rig task. You'll just run this command to import the data into your database. And so this command relies on your Rails app being called Rails Engine. So make sure that you follow that, or be ready to modify this if you name it something differently. Name it something different. English is hard sometimes. Okay, so there's instructions on how to download the data, and then you need to place it in inside of the data folder within your DB folder. So make sure you follow those instructions pretty closely. And I'm going to skip down here. I'll let y'all kind of read through this. When it comes to the actual API endpoints that you are going to be building, we have these endpoints split into 3 different sections. So in general, we want you to create API endpoints, and we also expect you to test those endpoints as well. So we're not just relying on the Postman test runner. We also need to see request specs for the API endpoints that you're building. And we'd like to see both the happy and sad paths for those tests tested in the test that you create. We're only returning JSON data, so no HTML in this project, no views, none of that. It's only going to be API endpoints that return JSON data. We want to be versioning our API, so it's important that we're namespacing all of our endpoints, which means we're namespacing our controllers to be under API v1, and then we'll get to the controller. And we also want you to make sure that your endpoints are adhering to the JSON API spec. So if you take a look at this is a specification for building JSON APIs. It is something that is used across the industry. I don't know how widely used it is, but it is a specification that you can adhere to. So what we encourage you to do is to take a look at this specification and try to follow that as closely as possible. And I believe that the test runner in Postman also is adhering to that specification. And so you'll be able to pick up on what you need, how you need to format your API endpoints pretty easily. Don't spend a ton of time like going in detail into the specification, but take a look at it and get a good idea of what it's asking you to do. I think this is an area you could easily get rabbit holed in, and you don't really need to get super rabbit holed into that. And so, yeah, to Ian's point, it's really specifying the structure of the data that you need to return from your endpoint. All right. Any questions about any of that? I feel like this project kickoff is probably a lot of information being thrown at you. So like I said, I encourage you to go back and really read through this in detail, and feel free to continue to reach out with questions as they come up. Jenny.
Yeah, I was looking at the section about the migration y'all are providing, and then just a few lines down, it says that we need to create our own migrations as well. Number 6.
Yeah.
And build migration files for those tables. I just wanted to ask about that because
so
it seems.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. I want to hear what you say, and then I'll see if I have more comments.
I was going to say, we're giving you a database dump. You still have to go build the migrations.
Okay. So I kind of Okay.
So you'll need to
Okay,
use
here's
it.
another.
Yeah, sorry. Lag is a wonderful thing. So what we say on here is like you're going to need to use a tool like Postico or something where you can go in and examine the database, and you're going to have to look at the fields that are in there and the data types of those fields so that you can actually run like the Rails G migration and actually build a migration file, because this is just going to import your development database. But in order for you to run tests, you need those migrations to build the test database.
Okay,
And
so
you,
we just
you have to
need the
build this.
okay, so
Right.
we need the migrations for our test database,
That's right.
because right now development doesn't like it if you run what you provided and also try to run the migrations.
Right.
Okay. Do we need to build all of our model tests? I didn't see that anywhere in this.
You will need models and some amount of model testing. You probably don't need to validate that the fields are populated. If you want to, you can. There will be other model code that you'll be building that you'll be testing. But yeah, if you want to use like shoulda matchers and just verify that your relationships are set up, I'm okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we got an anonymous question about using gems to serialize our data, or if you need to create manual serializers. And I believe we are recommending a specific gem. Is that right, Ian? I know we had kind of talked about this.
Yeah, so
Or do we
there is
want-
the fast JSON API that we would prefer that you use. Now, the version of that gem has been deprecated, but it is still working. So we want you to continue using that one for now. We haven't yet evaluated the newer version to know if it's going to work the way that we want you to. So yeah, if you just want to use the fast JSON API gem, I think Netflix published it. You will get a warning that it's been deprecated, but that's okay. It'll still work.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, you will still need to create your own serializers, which will be used in conjunction with that gem.
Right, so
Yeah.
some endpoints won't be able to use that gem, so you'll have to create your own serializers for them. But so it'll be a combination of both. All right, okay. So moving on, one of the things that we also would like you to do is make sure that you stick to using standard Rails actions and follow RESTful conventions. So what you'll find yourself doing is creating lots of controllers in order to do that. So instead of trying to put a bunch of endpoints into one controller and then naming it something other than, index, show, that sort of thing, like you are going to be creating like a merchant controller. And then, namespacing like merchant and then a search controller, and then you'd use the show action versus like putting a find action in a merchant's controller, if that makes sense. So only, I guess, like the moral of the story is only use standard Rails actions. Don't make up your own actions here. And in order to get around that, you're going to have to be creating namespace controllers. Okay, so there's some specific information around how we want you to format specific things like errors. So if you are sending back, like a 400 response error, then we want you to format your response in this way.
Sorry, Alex, just to clarify on that.
Yeah, sure.
If to get started for an error, we want you to just send back, like we say at the top, just a data element with a nil ID and no attributes. As an extension, what
Gotcha.
Alex has highlighted there,
That.
you can actually send back the error messages of what's going on, but only do that as an extension. For an error response, you can still serialize like a null object or a nil object, and it just won't have any attributes. It won't have an ID. But just make sure you're sending like a 400 series error code of some kind as an extension once everything else is done. If you want to tell the user why that thing failed, then you can build out your own custom error serializer. But do that as an extension work after.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that, Ian. Okay. So I'm actually I think I'm gonna let you read through this on your own. This section, it's got some information, but what I wanna point out is that for each of the sections, we're gonna have, there's different requirements. So for the first section of endpoints that you have to build, you need to build all of the endpoints. So there should be 9 total. And so for all of the merchant and items endpoints, we need you to build all of these for the first section, okay? Then we're gonna get into some more non-RESTful endpoints in the next section. And you have the option of choosing one of these endpoints. So you don't have to build both, you can do one or the other. And these are going to be search endpoints, or where you're going to be finding a specific resource based on search criteria that's passed through. Ben, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm wondering for that section, is this, so one of the following endpoint pairs, is this like find one merchant and find all items, is this tied to one endpoint, or is it 2 different endpoints in this section?
There'll be 2 different endpoints. But basically what we did is we have find one merchant, find all merchants, find one item, find all items, and we basically split them up. So if you're finding one merchant, you're going to find all items. And if you're finding one item, you're going to find all merchants. But you get to choose which of those pairs you're going to build. Okay. So if you just want to do one merchant, all items, or if you just want to do one item, all merchants, that's up to you.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so it's an endpoint pair, so that's correct. So it's 2 endpoints, but you can build 2 instead of 4. In the next section, you choose 4 of these endpoints. There are 7 total, and so you can pick 4 of those. Something to note, so we're using the same sales data that y'all used in like little Etsy shop, so it should be pretty familiar to you. Just keep in mind, you want to use invoices that have successful transactions and status of shipped when you're thinking about calculating revenue and things like that. So in total, we're asking you to build at a minimum 15 endpoints. So all of section 1, and then 2 from section 2, and then 4 from section 3. Okay. Any questions about that? Any other questions? Okay.
Just for some context, in the past, you used to have to write all the CRUD endpoints for both merchant and items, and there was a single find operation, and then there were like a whole bunch of business intelligence endpoints. And basically, we wanted to give students the choice. And so for section 2 and section 3, that's where you're going to get to choose kind of your own adventure of what you want to go build. And we've also slimmed down the number of endpoints that you have to build, but then we've added a little bit of complexity like pagination on some of them. This next section is basically going to go into like a huge amount of detail on each of those endpoints. So as you're going through and figuring out what you need to build, this will give you all that info.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, so as Ian mentioned, like this, for each section, you can find like even more of the requirements. And you'll see like an example response. So what we're expecting your JSON response to look like from your endpoint. And then there's additional information also about like query parameters. And you can, like he mentioned, we're allowing you to do pagination or like building in pagination. That's an optional query param for the user. Genevieve, I see your hand up before I keep going.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about like section 3 where we talk about the BI endpoints. So for this one, it says invoices must have a successful transaction and be shipped to the customer. There's also a status on the invoice level, but we're only caring about the status on the invoice item because invoice, I think, has like canceled or in progress or completed. Does that matter at all?
There's no status on the invoice items in this case. We just have the invoice and transactions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I am going to keep going. I'll let y'all read through this. That should give you some good details about what your API endpoints need to look like for each of the sections. Is there anything, Ian, that you do that we should be,
Yeah,
pointing
let's go
at
up
right
to
now?
let's go up to the item create or item update.
Okay.
Yeah, right here is good.
Here.
So updating an item. So whenever we're creating or updating an item, we want to make sure that you're sending this data over in the JSON, or you're sending over this as JSON data in the body of the request, and that you're not sending this stuff as query parameters. So we want to be really clear that we're expecting you to send this over in the body of the request, not as query params. And so this first gray block at the top here where it has name, description, unit price, and merchant ID, that's being sent in the body of your request. And I'll show you how to do that in Postman in a moment once we get there. But we just want to make sure that we're really clear on that. Now, when we get into the search endpoints, those will be query parameters. But when we're creating or updating an item, that stuff is being sent in the body.
Gotcha. Okay. And then here's where we're doing the search endpoints, find one, find all. And these are going to be query parameters. And so you'll see information about that here. Cool. Okay. I'm gonna scroll down. I think that's it in terms of the requirements. There's also a list of extensions that you can take a look at here if you do get through the MVP and want to do more. And then I would encourage you all to take a look at the evaluation, make sure that we are requiring a presentation. So similar to what we did for viewing party, we'll have a presentation, but we will be, that will be part of the rubric and the grading for this project this time around. And so take a look at this rubric and make sure you have a good understanding of how you'll be evaluated for this project. And that should also help drive some of your priorities. One of the things I do want to point out too, going back to the technical requirements, that as you complete your endpoints, we highly recommend that you do some of each section. So I think you might need to, like get most of these done in terms of like the order for section 1. But then I would encourage you to try out some of your business intelligence endpoints early on and not leave those until the very end of the project. And so I think those are things that you're, I think you'll be better off if you kind of manage your time by like trying to attempt some of the endpoints from each section versus just doing them in order. So if that makes sense, so like get all of the merchant endpoints done, and then from section 1, then go ahead and try to build out some of the search merchant endpoints, and then go ahead and try to do some of the merchant business intelligence endpoints, and then follow the same thing for items. Any questions about that? Okay. Genevieve.
So is this what you mean by trying to follow more of an agile process, or is there?
Yeah, so I think this is more of how you prioritize the work. But in terms of following an agile process, I think what we want you to do is take a look at the requirements and like on your project board, try to plan out and create some milestones for yourself to say like, I want to get through this many endpoints by, you know, like Monday, or I want to get to here. And then we're saying in terms of how you order those endpoints, try to do some from each section. If that makes sense, if that was clearer.
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. I think that's all I was gonna say.
Alex, do you want
Ian,
to talk a
is
little
there
bit more
anything I
about
missed?
the actual eval process and how that's different?
Oh yeah. So in this case, we are going to do a group eval. And so I believe how that's going to be structured, and Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, or Tim, correct me if I'm wrong. We are going to have you, each student is going to present. And so it'll give you an opportunity to see, you know, how other people have implemented similar functionality. And we'll have a conversation about, you know, some of the trade-offs, pros and cons, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's going to be, you'll be with your peers when we're doing the eval. And then of course we'll DM you individually your scores. But similar, I think similar to how we did some of the evals in mod 2, we'll be doing those in a group. Okay. Cool. Anything else before we jump into Postman? Ian, Tim? Okay. I'll hand it. Oh, Adam, I see your hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, on the just the projects page, it says we highly encourage you to attempt some of the BI queries before the advanced active record class. I see there's an active record class tomorrow, but I didn't see anything else for next week. And is it just not on there? Or maybe I missed it.
Yeah, sorry, we should have taken that off. So we actually don't have that advanced active record class anymore because what we were teaching in that class was what you learned in mod 2 now. So we actually moved that lesson down into mod 2. And the way that Brian's been teaching it there, you're actually like, it was just a repeat of the information. So the active record thing that's on the calendar tomorrow is a couple of like recorded versions of the class. So if you want something to go back and review, it'll be how we did that in mod 3 in the past. And there's one that was taught by Josh Mejia, who is like longtime instructor at Turing a long time ago. And then I think 1 or 2 videos from previous cohorts that I taught. It'll just give you like different perspectives. I go into detail like how the SQL engine actually like breaks down and like processes the query and how I turn a SQL query into active record. And so that time tomorrow is just to review 1 or more of those videos if you want.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, any other questions? Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, cool. I'll stop sharing, and Ian will talk about Postman.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Let's go over to here. All right, so what we have for you on the project, actually, let me pull up the project over here again. Not my personal email. We'll do this, so back end. And we'll look at, where's the projects at? Projects, Rails engine. All right, so on this page, I list out a whole bunch of information about what Postman is doing. And basically what we've got is we've got these 3 files that you can download. Now, when you click on them, your browser may actually show the JSON file. At this point, you can just hit Command S for save and just save it as a file name on your system. And then you're going to import these into Postman. And basically what these are basically just like compilations of JavaScript tests that I've written in Postman. So you can actually, yeah, even I look at Stack Overflow. Thanks, Tim. You'll actually be able to run all of your tests in Postman. So this will kind of keep you in Postman while you're building out your endpoints and testing out your endpoints. You can use Postman to hit your own local host and try different things. But then we've also got these tests actually built out in Postman. Y'all are cracking me up in chat. I actually do have quite a few points on Stack Overflow from answering questions, but that was a long time ago. Now I think I rely on it more for answers than having time to go answer them. So when you import these files, you're basically going to get these three sections. You're going to get Rails Engine Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. And these basically go into those different sections that Alex outlined. So Part 1 is just the CRUD for merchants and items. And so as you expand these, here's your endpoint to go get all of your merchants. Now, when you run this, you'll actually see that we have green dots next to the pre-request script. And this is basically our test setup. And then the tests, these are actually the tests written in JavaScript. So if you want to go see how I wrote those tests in JavaScript, you can. You won't be changing these. You won't be changing this data. You won't be changing the tests, but they're there if you want to look at them. But for example, I've got my Rails S running in the background. When I run this now, it's actually going to go hit my endpoint. And we can see here in Postman that 7 of 7 tests passed. And if you click on that, it'll show you the 7 different tests. And it's both a mix of happy path and sad path. Now, when I run this again, it actually changes the order that these run. And so they don't always run like top to bottom. But like I said, if you want to go in and you want to look at how those tests are actually written, you can. But we don't want you writing tests in Postman. We don't want you changing the stuff in here. They're just there so that while you're in Postman, you can continue to like hit your endpoint and also see whether the tests are passing for what our expectation is. Now, what the data is testing here is from the database dump in development mode. And so if you are actively adding merchants and items and invoices and things like that, you may need to drop, recreate, migrate, and seed your database before you run the Postman tests. Otherwise, the tests may fail because you've added additional merchants or you've added additional items or you've changed some information or something like that. So if that happens, if a test is failing and you don't think it should be, try rebuilding your database and see if that makes the test pass. Dominic, I saw you unmuted. What's up?
Oh, that was on accident. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. No worries. Just checking. All right, so let's keep going through here. So we've got this broken down into like merchants and items, and these are the 3 endpoints for the merchant. And then for the items, it's doing a get all, get one. This does both a create and a delete all in one shot. And this is so that other tests continue to pass. And so this operation will actually both create and then immediately turn around and delete what it tries to create. If you want to like test out the delete yourself, you can just come and change the verb to be a delete and you can test that out on your own. Or do that as a separate tab so that you don't modify what's here. And then for extensions, these are edge cases. And so if you really want to test like what would happen if I try to go get a merchant's items and that merchant ID is bad, for example, what should happen? In this case, we're just looking for those 400 errors to come back. So like we're expecting a 404. So we're not specifically looking necessarily for like error content in the body. Now that said, this is a little bit of a work in progress. I think I just contradicted myself here where we don't need this. So if we do find that stuff, we'll just correct it as a class and I'll tell everybody like what to edit and where. But for the most part, I've gone through and I've cleaned all this up based on feedback from last inning because some of these didn't work. So we've got part 1, part 2, and then I'll get to Angel's question in a sec. Part 2 are the non-restful endpoints. And again, you've got set 1 and set 2. And inside of each of these, you have your happy path, sad path tests, as well as extensions and edge cases. For your MVP, we just want you to cover your happy path and sad path. Do the edge cases as extension work. So once your happy path and sad path is done and you've got all of your other endpoints done, then come back and revisit edge cases. Okay, don't do edge cases to begin with. We just want happy path and sad path. And then part 3 are all the business intelligence endpoints. And so what we can do here now is we can actually tell Postman to go run all of the tests for each section at a time. So down here in the very bottom right corner of Postman, if you're on version 8, it'll be in the bottom right corner. If you're on version 7, it'll be up here in the top left of the interface. But what you're going to do is you're going to click on the runner. And what you're going to do is you're going to drag that collection over to this window, and you're just going to let go. And from here, then you can select which of the tests you want to run. And so if you say, well, I haven't gotten to these ones yet, well, then you can just shut those off. And then you can say, okay, well, now go run all the tests. And it's just going to go run that whole suite, and it'll tell you which ones passed or not from there. Now to import into here, there's an import button, and you just click on import and you navigate to where those files were that you downloaded in your browser. And then they'll add as collections in here, and you can access them from the collections tab in Postman. So again, we click on the runner down here in the bottom right, we drag the collection over. So I go back to runner, and now I'm going to run part 2. Now for part 2, we needed to know which section we're going to run. So let's say I did find one merchant and find all items. So I'm going to shut off the find one item and find all merchants. And I'm just going to go run those tests. Now, if you run the whole suite, then obviously not all the tests are going to pass, and that's okay. And also for the edge case and sad path tests, those tests won't pass until you get to the edge cases, and that's okay too. So we don't expect all tests and all of these collections to pass in order to pass the project, because it's covering a lot of edge cases and it's covering like every endpoint in the project. And so you can just go in and you can pick and choose which tests you want to run, and it'll tell you whether those are passing based on your development database. All right, let's go to Angel for question.
So whenever we run our tests in Postman, do we have to run Rails server, or
Yes.
can we? Okay.
Yeah, because it is hitting localhost. So for example, if I come back here and just look at this one endpoint, it's actually going to try to go to localhost API v1 merchants. In this case, there's no body to send over. And so this is just going to go fetch a list of all of my merchants. And if I click on body, then I see all the data that came back from that. But for example, to go create an item, in this case, we do see a body. And so how we send this over in Postman is you build out a JSON block here. Now in JSON, the keys have to be in double quotes and your value has to be in double quotes. The reason that these are in double curly braces is because they're part of the setup data that I have in here. But you can just say like name is widget, and you can just kind of customize this stuff yourself. Like this is my description of awesome item. Like you can just change these to whatever you like. Just don't save the change in here. Like if you try to close this, it'll ask if you want to save it. Don't save it if you change it. Otherwise the tests may not pass anymore. But in this scenario, what we need to do here is in the body, you can select this dropdown. By default, it'll say text, and you just go and select JSON instead, because typically it'll say none over here. So you can just pick JSON from here, and it should pick raw in this format over here. And then you just pick JSON from the dropdown, and then you actually write in this information, and that will send it over in the request body. And so that's how you're going to test that you can actually receive JSON body data as your request. And it will be important that you test for that. And then you can go read up on how to do that in our spec tests as well. Angel,
Okay.
did you have another question?
No, I think that answered it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Cool. What else can I share about Postman? Let's go to Jenny.
Is there a way with these tests in Postman to see where they fail on the test?
That's a little bit trickier, but that's a really good question, because this is something that we do tend to get students asking about. So if we see a test that doesn't pass, it just tells you that it failed. And if you click on failed, it'll only show you the test that actually failed. It doesn't tell you why. And so that does get a little bit confusing. If you go into test mode here, you can just comment out like the other things. And you can do something like console log if you want to get into some JavaScript. I would say if you get to the point where you're not sure why it's failing, you can reach out to us for help, and we'll show you like either how to do a console log, or maybe put a pry in your actual code, or like print it out to your own Rails console, like where you're running your Rails server, and see what's actually happening, to do a little bit of debugging, because that is the downside to doing this, is it doesn't tell you why it failed. It's just something about an expectation in here. Like, I expected this payload to have a data element, and I expected that to be an array, and I expected it to have 20 things. But if it fails somewhere along here, it doesn't say it failed because you didn't have 20 things. In some of the scenarios, it will. In some scenarios, it will say like, oh, this part of the expectation failed, but sometimes it's a little bit ambiguous. So if you need help with that, just reach out to us and we'll help you out with it. In the past, we used to have a whole separate Rails repo that you would download that had a whole bunch of RSpec tests that you would run. So you'd still have to run your Rails S, and in the other terminal, you would then have to like go into the other folder, run all of the other tests in that other repo to see what passed and what didn't pass. And that got a little bit confusing for students, because like trying to run multiple terminals and multiple, like, where do you put those projects so that they can kind of see each other, and be able to see the code. It got pretty confusing. Plus, by the time then that we got into the consultancy project and the sweater weather project, students were like, what's Postman again? And so we moved all of the tests into Postman here, just to keep you in Postman, so that it's a regular tool in your toolbox and you get comfortable with using Postman. Right. What else can I help you with here on Postman? Yeah, Genevieve, what do you have?
Since we're creating an API and there's not necessarily any views, so we're not going to be deploying this, like the exposing of the API is kind of all that's expected.
Yeah, you will not be deploying this to Heroku. So there's no expectation that this is actually live on the internet anywhere. You'll be demoing it on localhost. And so as part of your presentation, you'll have, you can run these endpoints in Postman if you want, or if you want to build up your own collection of endpoints for happy path and sad path kind of thing, you'll be demoing that through Postman as part of your presentation there. I think there is an extension if you do want to like put it online, but don't do that to get started. Don't spend time on that. Like spend the like do the right thing at the right time. We don't want you to focus on those kinds of things and get caught up on that and then not complete the project.
And I thought of one more question, if I may.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I was just curious, like in the industry in general, let's pretend we were creating an API that we were exposing outward to maybe another company or a client who was then going to consume that data. What is something that you would normally do as like a Postman, a common tool that you would test that from an external standpoint, not just your test within your app? Or
it varies from company to company as far as like what they make available. Typically, I mean, a lot of companies, they treat documentation as like the bare minimum of, these are the endpoints, these are the inputs, this is what the output's going to look like, and that's all you get. Some of them will go a step deeper where you can actually like get snippets of code. Like if you're trying to hit this endpoint in Ruby, here's like a snippet of code of how to actually send it and how to parse the data that comes back. Some will actually have like Postman collections where they will actually export that and say, if you really want to test our API, go set your API key at this point in Postman, and then like you can just run all these tests just to kind of see like what the payloads of data look like when they come back. Every company is different though, as far as how they build it out, but usually at a minimum, like we hope that they at least document their API and that they document it well. Because it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, we have this endpoint, API v1 movies, good luck. And it's like, well, what do I send to it? Like what inputs can it take? And like if it's an integer, what range is that integer? Like if I can send you a page number, do I start at 0? Do I start at 1? How big can I make that page number? Like, what should I expect if the page is invalid? Like, some people don't document that kind of stuff. So the requirements that we've given you for the project are pretty documented as far as like what we expect the parameters to take as far as values and so on. So to give you a pretty good indicator there. If you want to build up a README, we highly encourage, like, just at a very high level, document like what those endpoints are. Some students do put this project on their resume if they want to highlight, how they've built out an API. And so we would encourage you, try to do a little bit of documentation on what those endpoints are. Maybe it doesn't have to go into the amount of detail that we've given you for the project, but you could just say, like, here's the endpoint, here's like the input, here's what the output will look like, for Happy Path, and just document your Happy Path stuff. That would be fine as well. Cool. What else can we answer for you here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information here. And
Yeah.
so take some time to digest it all, read through this pretty carefully. And then if you've got questions, you can DM us or put it in the Code Help channel as well.
If you do have problems with Postman testing, please let me know ASAP, and I'll get those corrected. And I'll send out instructions for everyone on like how to delete the old collection or import a new collection if there's something really drastic, or like, if this one's failing for this or that reason, like just ignore this part of it or something like that. Because like I said, there may still be a little bit of refinement in there, but collectively with the class last inning, which is the first time we moved all this stuff into Postman, we got a fair amount of feedback on like how to clean up those tests. So we went through and we kind of cleaned them up as we went. So we really appreciate your patience. If you do run into a little snag, we'll correct it as soon as we can and get that back out to everybody.
All right. I think
Cool.
if there are no more questions, that's all we wanted to cover with you. And I think this afternoon you've got some PD with Ryan, it looks like. So do we want to talk briefly about tomorrow as well right now?
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so tomorrow, Ian, Tim, and I are actually going to be offline. Well, offline, we have got a back-end planning day tomorrow with all the back-end instructors. And so we'll be, there are a couple of activities that you all will be doing. So we'll start out with a team retro. So you'll get with your teams and for viewing party and just do a final retro. And then we're also asking you to do some leak code practice as well. That's going to, we put small groups together for y'all to go through and try to write some pseudocode, again, similar to what you did last week. And then additionally, we're setting aside some time for you to review some of those active record videos that Ian mentioned earlier, which has a review of, some of the active record strategies for putting together some of the more advanced queries. So, and then you also have some project work time tomorrow. So just want to make sure that you're aware that all will be on the calendar, and we, won't be necessarily available tomorrow all day because we'll be in this planning session. So any questions about that? Okay. Cool. All right, y'all. Thanks so much. We will talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.